Hey everybody, Randy here. Welcome to the first episode of Randy's Wheelhouse. Today I'm going to be talking about the count 'em, six best gassers, or cars that would make the best gassers that aren't uh, 55 Chevys. No disrespect to the 55 Chevys out there, but if you ever go to an event where you see gassers, you see a lot of them. And I've come up with six alternatives. Um, I didn't invent these, but I've come up with a list of six alternatives that you also might see around, and I think we need to see a little bit more of. So here we go. Number one, the Willys Americar. I know it's technically you're supposed to say Willis, but nobody does that. So the Americar, they built about 180,000 from 1937 to 42. They only called the 41s and 42s Americars, I believe. But for the sake of, simplicity, they're basically all the same. Just kind of look a little bit different. The stock engines kind of had some issues. The Go Devil 4 cylinders. They weren't terrible, but they were, they kind of had some known problems. And so examples of them kind of, in period, like in the 60s, they were plentiful and they were cheap. So you could buy a 20-year-old Americar with an engine that doesn't run so good, and just rip out the 4-cylinder, put in a V8, which you could do pretty easily because the engine bay was so huge, and you basically had a race car. Put it in a straight axle and some slicks, and there you go. So these solid choice, probably pretty close to the Chevy in terms of popularity. The 55 Chevy, I would say those are probably, you see a little bit more of those, but these are a close number two. And these are, famous. Example number two, one of my favorites, the Kaiser Frazer Henry J. Most people just call him the Henry J. They built about 120,000 of these between 1950 and 54. And there was another like 2,000 or so called the Allstate. And you could actually buy those out of Sears catalog. Sears sold those, but there was the exact same car, just different badge on it. And these became very popular in the gasser and drag racing scene because they were very small and lightweight. So you could, plop a big block V8 into one of these, and it would just, go like a rocket because it was so small. And another advantage of these cars is that they're very simple. Like they didn't even have a trunk lid. So, a toddler with sufficient Lego experience could probably, do most of the repairs you need to do on one of these. So these are also a very common and very successful choice. Now the Ford Fairlane. I'm just talking specifically about the first 3 years, the 55 to 57. Ones after that, they were very successful in drag racing. I've seen a few 58 generation gassers, not too many. They exist, but for we're talking about gassers here. I'd say 55 to 57, and Ford being a massive company, they managed to turn out almost 2 million, like 1.8 million. So that's a lot of cars, and so you could kind of find them everywhere, and they're pretty big. In terms of size, they were big. So an advantage of that being you could easily drop in like any engine you could imagine, and something even bigger if you wanted to. But a disadvantage that came with that is because they were so big, they're also naturally a lot heavier than other things, and so they kind of needed that big engine for them to be competitive, which they still were. They weren't horrible, but they did have a little slight disadvantage because of their weight. But you still see them, and they are still competitive and solid race cars. Now the Willys 77, these were like the predecessor to the Americar I was talking about before. So they were a little smaller. They made only like 67,000 of these between 33 and 36. The production was pretty limited because of the Great Depression, and the company was had no money at all. But they still fell into the hands of hot rodders who made some pretty great race cars out of them. Most notably, Ohio George Montgomery. He had a Willys, who you are seeing on the screen right now. This was his car kind of in 1959, I think, and this is kind of what it looked like towards the end when he stopped using it in 66. So, and between those years, 59 and 66, he won every single NHRA A-Gas championship title, which is very impressive, and I think says all you need to know about the credibility of a Willys 77 as a gasser. They were known for being small and lightweight, kind of like the Henry J, but of course you could still fit a big Hemi, or he eventually put a 427 in his. Started with George, I'm talking about. He started with a Cadillac, kind of went down to a small block Chevy, and then went back up to a Ford 427, and he won with all of those engines. So the Willys is a solid gasser platform, I think. Number 5, I'm saying the Chevy 2. They made over 1 million of these between 1962 and 65, and they were relatively small in size. That was always something, racers were looking for, especially in a gasser, is a small car that they could put a big engine in. And that's really what this was. They had a unibody construction, meaning that's, it's a more rigid and solid platform, literally. So that's an advantage over, say, the Willys I was just talking about, or a 32 Ford or something. They had the a ladder frame and then the body on top of that, so they're prone to more things like chassis flex and stuff like that. So these are more solid, and especially under launch, they're a lot more rigid, and they'll just go. And these cars were also frequently built into altered wheelbase cars. As I kind of have over here, you can see the rear wheels have just been nudged forward a little bit, and that was a pretty common thing to do, especially for these kind of body style cars in drag racing. And yeah, these were kind of like the beginning of the end for gassers, though. These, and once it was actually George Montgomery, who I talked about before, brought in a Mustang. That was kind of, the lines of what a gasser was becoming kind of blurry, and eventually what were gassers kind of evolved into late model pro stocks and stuff like that. So these were kind of the end of the road for the classic gasser. And finally, number 6. This isn't a ranking, but the 6th one I'm talking about here is one of my favorites, the Ford Anglia. These were built by Ford of England, and they made about 150,000 of them. Between, Jesus Christ, they built about 150,000 in England between 1939 and 53, but only the years 48 to 53 were sold in North America. These things were they were tiny. They had a 90-inch wheelbase, which was nearly a foot shorter than the Henry J I was talking about, which was already pretty small car on its own. And somehow, people still managed to fit in Hemis and big blocks, and it's nuts what they managed to do with these things. But I think these are, some of the coolest drag racing cars out there. And because they were so small, small engines were often used, like small block Chevys, for example. Another one I find interesting is this car over here, pulling that fat wheelie. Was actually powered by a Chevy 6-cylinder. It was some GM engineer drove it, and he put in a Chevy 6-cylinder, and that's, if it can rip a wheelie like that, it's certainly no slouch. So, Ford Anglia, good call. So yeah, I guess that's pretty much it for me. The final message I wanted to end on here is to just say that, all these cars They are awesome, but they are not the only things that you can ever make a gasser or just anything out of. If you want to put in a if you want to put a 2JZ in your Mazda Miata and throw a straight axle under it, I would be happy to see how that ends up looking. So, you know, don't don't restrict yourself. Go crazy, as the Fink says. And yeah, that's it from me. So thank you for watching, and I'll catch you some other time probably.